Okay, today I will be going over the Module 7 assignment. The first part of the prompt reads as follows. In the 1997 case of University and Community College System of Nevada versus Farmer, Farmer was initially awarded $40,000 in damages for violation of the Equal Pay Act. The university won an appeal in front of the state of Nevada's Supreme Court. The U.S. Supreme Court declined to hear the case, leaving the lower court's verdict in place. We are to defend or critique the finding of the Nevada Supreme Court using a deontological or teleological approach. I decided to first review the case. That way, whoever's listening or reading my script would kind of have a grasp of the situation and what, following the case. I wrote, there are many factors we must consider regarding this case. We must consider that at the time of the case, only 1% of the university's faculty were Black, making the majority of the staff white, and only about 25% of the faculty were women. There was a minority bonus policy implemented, which allowed each department to hire an additional faculty member after the initial placement of a minority candidate. After this, the university had a vacancy in the sociology department, which needed a candidate that had to be proficient in social psychology and formal organizations. The typical process of hire required more than one interview. However, the university was able to waive this procedure if they needed to. Farmer ended up being one of the 3 finalists for this position. There was a protocol at this time that required a waiver in order to interview one of the other African American candidates. The department chair then recalled that the committee ranked the African American candidate first out of the top 3 candidates. They did have a shortage of African American PhD candidates, which they offered the African American candidate a bonus upon completing his PhD. After another candidate, Farmer, claimed she was more qualified for the position, she then found out that, or I guess everyone kind of looked into her case, and the candidates, I thought at least looking at the case, were comparable regarding their qualifications for the job. Farmer then filed a complaint that she was discriminated against because of her being a woman and claimed that this violated the Equal Pay Act. She also filed a complaint that she was discriminated against because of both her race and gender, which violates the Civil Rights Act. Her third claim was that the university went against their policies regarding her initial terms and conditions of employment. Her final claim was that the university breached their promise of good faith and fair dealing, which is common among universities. After all the evidence was secured regarding her allegations, the district court rejected Farmer's proposition presented to the jury. One of the main arguments or issues that could have resulted from this case would be if the men in the jury were biased or if they were like quote unquote reasonable men. If those men were present in the jury, like a different conclusion would have been found. At that point in time, I know there wasn't as many women in law enforcement and law regulations and the court systems as there is now. So I can kind of see where that comes from. I know society was also more biased back then. The university claims that the district court made a large error by not entering a jury instruction with that case. I do agree with that conclusion. I think the case overall should have been taken further, just because, it is an applicable case for that time. We have documents like the Civil Rights Act in place for a reason, and they are made for a reason. Those social injustices and biases, those do happen in society. That's why we have those in place to try to negate any issues like that, taking people for who they are rather than what they look like or their gender. On the other hand, I do believe that the African American candidate was more fit for the job in this particular case, because I'm sure with sociology they were looking for someone more, maybe not more diverse, but an African American with a PhD was much more rare back then than probably a woman with a PhD at that point in time. With that being said, it does not make it right for the court system to deny a case that does have evidence of injustice. Do I believe it was true injustice? Not necessarily. Um, I think it probably could have been handled better. Of course, I mean, I wasn't there. I don't even think I was alive at this point. So, I can't for sure say, but I do know society was much different back then and that there possibly was some injustice. Um, but overall, my critique concludes that the case should have gone further regarding the legalities behind the case because with it being a school system and everything, the Civil Rights Act, all those, they're under a lot more heat when it comes to those just because it's a place of education and everything like that. So I do think the case should have been taken further, whether or not the verdict was true injustice or not. The second part of the prompt was to discuss the Watchmark Comnatel Corporation. It has undergone significant changes since their case of outsourcing. They were renamed Valent Corporation and later were acquired by IBM. This shows the competitive nature of the software industry. Based on this knowledge, examine the outsourcing actions taken by Watchmark Comnatel from the deontological and teleological perspectives. I thought this was an interesting case as well. From a deontological perspective, we see that this corporation needed to find what to outsource. They did enforce strategic planning on what to outsource. The company did not execute this properly, which led to identity theft and many other issues within the company and their procedures. From this perspective, we can see that the company is good at outsourcing, but their follow-up with procedures was not their strong suit. The employees clearly needed to be properly trained on the legalities of the outsourcing process. Then they wouldn't need to compromise the safety and quality of their overall product. From a teleological perspective, the outsourcing project would be considered a failure just because it wasn't 100% successful in the end result. The outsourcing project wasn't completely successful regarding their final results from this perspective. I did think the company definitely learned a lot, but I think their follow-up with their outsourcing and legalities behind that is what put them under, really. The third part of the prompt was to present an argument that it is easier for employers to comply with diversity legislation in Canada than it is in the US. I argued that it is easier for employers to comply with diversity legislation in Canada than it is in the US because there is less judgment and residual bitterness regarding like slavery and diversity. I know everything from like the 60s and all that. I do believe it's improving in our society, but I still think it can still be seen in some ways, and there is some bitterness. The effects of American slavery are still clear in society today. Since Canada doesn't see these effects as much, it makes diversity a more open and natural topic in their society, rather than like a civil rights movement where we have parties, fighting for what they believe is right. They, I feel, have kind of like filtered in their diversity rather than making it such like a national uproar. I think since they didn't have the effects of slavery like we did, that they can kind of filter that into their society a little more fluidly. Since the society is more open to diversity, it makes it easier for employers to comply with diversity legislation in Canada because diversity is like less taboo there. It's more of just naturally filtered in, I believe. The fourth part of the prompt was to select a source of media as outlined in Exercises in Media Diversity. Comment on the questions listed in the textbook for the media option you selected. I personally chose to do the first investigation option, which was electronic media, primetime TV. I chose option B, which was to watch 3 different primetime crime dramas between 6 p.m. and 11 p.m. I believe that Forensic Files targets more of like an older educated population or individuals that are looking for informational and dramatic television. The Forensic Files series that was all based on true stories. So the show was very informational and geared toward an educated audience rather than just drama. It had more information than the other shows. Um, the second show that was on was NCIS. This show seemed to be geared toward a middle-aged audience that is educated but also enjoys dramas. It was more geared toward drama than information compared to the Forensic Files series. The last show that was on was Criminal Minds. I noticed the references in the show were geared toward a younger audience, and a lot of the cast was a little bit younger than NCIS. I noticed the references were geared toward the younger audience with individuals like in their 20s and 30s. It seemed to me more informational than NCIS, but not an educated based like Forensic Files. I thought the stereotype and cultural messages that the program sends on a whole were positive in nature. Every show had individuals from different races that were all portrayed as well educated on the shows. I did not notice any particular gender or race discrimination in this series or in any of the series, really. The main individual in the Forensic Files episode was actually a woman and African American. I thought the shows represented equality and power and knowledge since they were all informational or like real world. I know the world has changed even the past couple months, just with forensics and all these children going missing and everything. I think shows like that are based on like drama but also factual information are very valuable, like in our society today, to get people in, like the drama gets people interested in it because it is a real world issue. Me being an MSN forensics major, it's clearly already interesting to me, but I think the drama part of it brings people in, and then information thrown in there really helps educate the public. I thought that the commercials that were on during this time were geared toward an audience like in their early 30s. The commercials I saw, there were like commercials for football, Target, and vehicle sales were like the main three that I noticed. I did notice that many of the commercials were also diverse in nature. I noticed the one Target commercial I saw had a woman wearing a hijab, and the vehicle sales commercial showed a black man purchasing a car. The football commercial actually showed a Native American football player, which I had never seen before. I overall think that the commercials showed how diverse our society is, and that no matter your race or religion, you can be a contributing member of society. I will put my references on my script here and upload the video.